Visual Studio 2019 is an incredibly powerful, easy to use, and full-featured development environment for the PC. Best of all, like Visual Studio 2017 before it, the Community Edition is free. So what sets this edition apart from the 2017 version? In this video, we're going to dive into the details. But before we get started, if you're new to my channel, my name is Tim Corey, and it's my goal to make learning C# easier. Whether you're new to C# or have used it for years, you should be able to find something here that will benefit you. Now, if you're interested in getting course discounts and other perks, sign up for my mailing list. The link to do so is in the description. Also, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you can get alerted when I post new content. I post new videos every Monday and Thursday, with occasional bonus videos beyond that. Okay, let's get started by looking at the first screen you will see once Visual Studio loads. So after you get past the splash screen, this is what comes up. Now, I have been using Visual Studio 2019 for about a month and a half or so. And so I've got a lot of recent projects in here. So you won't see this necessarily, but this is the screen you will see. And this gives you the options to get started. And this is a little bit different than the new project dialog we were used to in 2017. It's got a nicer look, but also it hasn't loaded Visual Studio underneath. Notice that it's just this window. Now I can say continue without code, and that will open Visual Studio with nothing inside of it. But I also have these options over here. I can clone or check out code. I can open a project or solution, open a local folder, create a new project, and that's my list. Okay, so we're going to do a create a new project just because we want to get started with something fresh and new. We'll do something simple. So let's do an ASP.NET Core web application. That's kind of the brand new hotness here. Before we do though, I want you to look at, first of all, the recent project templates. So over here, this is my list. So I recently been working on a bunch of different things, but you see Azure Functions, Windows Form app for .NET Core. That's a fun new one in .NET Core 3.0, which this Visual Studio supports. But also, so that's my recent projects, but also I can have this list right here, which is a long list. These are all the project templates. And it may look at first like you miss the old way of doing things where you have these folders that you dive into. But I think this is a better solution because notice the tags underneath this project in particular: C#, Windows, Linux, Mac, Web. So I can start looking by project type. I can look by platform. I can look by language, or I can even search. And the search will search the title, which in this case is ASP.NET Core Web Application. It'll search the description, which is this section of text right here. And it will search the tags. So I could search for, let's just say, web, which is a platform. But now notice I have a number of things that all have the web tag. This one does not, but it has web job in the title. So that allows me to dial into exactly what I want. So if I wanted a class library project, it gives me my options. I have .NET Standard, which is probably the way to go. I have .NET Framework if you're using a full framework library. .NET Core, just targeting .NET Core. And then others that you might use like a WCF service or a class library for .NET Standard in VB, and so on. And there's F#, looks like, which means I have to further limit my search and say, well, I just want C#, and there's my options there. And if I say, well, I actually want something that'll work on, let's go with Xbox, nothing. What about Android? Well, just .NET Standard will work. So that allows me to kind of target things to what I'm looking for. So Linux, I can do .NET Standard or .NET Core. So it's really helping me dial into what I want. Now in this case, I know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the ASP.NET Core Web Application. So I can hit Next. And now this same dialog has now changed over to, all right, we're going to create an ASP.NET Core web application, which I can go back and do something different if I want. And it tells me what the tags are so I can see that. But it says where you want to create and what do you want to call it. So let's create a web application. So let's call this web app demo. And I'll call a solution name. Let's call it VS 2019 demo. And location, I'm going to change this to a file I have on my hard drive for demos. And we're not going to place the solution project in the same folder. I wanted to have a separate folder, which is normal. Hit create. And now we'll go to the next step. So now I have the option of what do I want to set up? Well, I'm going to set up, I could do a .NET Core 2.2 or 3. Notice this drop down here. I could also change from .NET Core to .NET Framework. Don't want to do that right now. I'm going to select .NET Core, ASP.NET Core 2.2 for my framework because that's the one that is actually in release right now. 3.0 is not out for production yet. It's in development still. It's out in a preview version, and it's mostly focused on the taking .NET Core to WPF and WinForms, which does not make them cross-platform, just so we're clear. They're not going to be cross-platform. It'll still only work on Windows. But what it does do is it gives you a back end of .NET Core, and since .NET Core is a much faster language, it has some much more powerful features behind it, it makes your desktop applications in .NET in Windows much faster. So it's still definitely a benefit, but it doesn't make them cross-platform, just so you're clear. Okay, so we're going to do a .NET Core 2.2 web application, which is the new Razor Pages style. Let's leave authentication off for now, and we'll leave it configured for HTTPS. This is something else that's come into this platform very quickly and easily, is the ability to add a requirement that your application, your web application, use HTTPS, which is amazing because first of all, you can develop and debug in HTTPS locally. You don't have to have a certificate. It creates a certificate for you, a dev certificate just for testing, but it allows you to test just like you'd be in production. And it also enforces that rule of you can't use an unsecured web connection because that's just not a good idea. And we are going to add Docker support. Now, Docker support is something that I'll be covering in a future video, but Docker support it's a pretty awesome option. So we're going to add that as well, and I'll add it for Linux. Now, if you don't have Docker Desktop installed, you'll need to install that. So everything here I'm covering, except for the Docker support, I have a course called Getting Started with .NET Core that will cover all of this in much more detail. This is more about the Visual Studio 2019, not about .NET Core. If you want .NET Core stuff, Getting Started with .NET Core, I'll link it down in the description below, and you can follow that link and try it out. The first video that kind of introduces it is all free. But the course itself is not. The course is paid. All right, so you've got our web application with Razor Pages, HTTPS, Docker support, no authentication, hit create. Now, once it does, it'll be fairly quickly doing this. It's going to also start in the background. Notice in the lower left-hand corner, it was really quick, but now it's restoring packages. So even though it is ready and I can start using it, it's still restoring packages while we're talking. Okay, and I haven't paused the video or done any video magic here. This is all real time. And what it's done is it's done a whole bunch of settings and setup for us. So now this is our web application. So for example, there's our Docker file and so on. Now what this means is that Visual Studio is ready for you when you're ready to go to .NET Core. It's also ready for you when you're ready to go to Docker. And it's ready for you when you want to have some of the advanced stuff. Like, for example, if we look real quick in Startup, there's a couple things in here like a cookie policy. And there's, if you install the authentication, it has the idea of forget me, which the cookie policy and the forget me and even two-factor authentication, these are things that are coming down from regulations like the GDPR in Europe, which really puts some restrictions around how websites interact and says you can't just go crazy with customer data. You have to protect it. You have to do things a certain way. And so Visual Studio 2019 and the new packages it brings in allows for a lot easier work with that. So again, you'll find out more in the .NET Core course. But I just want to say that, this Visual Studio 2019, the templates that come in with it are great. Okay, so let's talk through some of the things that we find on this page. So let's open up, let's just find. We've got code here. Now notice down, I'm going to zoom in here. Notice down here in the lower left-hand corner, I have a thing that says no issues found. Well, what is that? This is a tool that now runs, and it's a page health. And it watches the page that you're on and tracks the health of that page. So for example, if I were to say, let's say something like var I, which you can't do because you have to declare what type I is, that gives me a red squiggly. But it's kind of hard to see because it's I. Now, it's not a great variable name, but I can't really see that squiggly if I'm not paying attention to it that closely. But down here in our health, we now have one error, one warning. Notice how it popped up? I didn't hit compile. It just happened. And the reason why is because it's watching the page in real time and saying, oh, I know what to do there. I need to tell you that there's an error, there's a warning. So I can click on that and says, hey, implicitly typed variables must be declared. And the warning is I is declared but never used. So if I were to assign it a value, let's assign it to 1. Now the error goes away, but I still have a warning because the warning says the variable I is assigned to, but its value is never used. So it's some really helpful stuff like that that makes life easier. Now, and this is a big one if you've used Visual Studio 2017 Community Edition. One of the things you've probably noticed in my videos is this little thing right above the method. So it says right here, it says 0 references. I can't even highlight it, but it says 0 references and 0 exceptions. I'll zoom in on it. Right there. That little thing right there pops up over methods, and when they make changes, for example, up here it says 1 reference. If you have unit tests, it will say how many tests have passed, how many tests have failed, 1 of 2 or whatever, and it will link to them. It'll tell you the author, all this good information. This is called CodeLens. Well, in 2017, it was only available in the Professional Edition and the Enterprise Edition. The great news is that for 2019, CodeLens is available even on the Community Edition, the free version. Okay, so you'll be able to see the information you're looking for, like references and application insights and information on the tests that apply to that method. So that'll make your life even easier, even if you're on the free version. Now, another thing you may have noticed I haven't mentioned yet is the actual menu bar at the top. It's actually collapsed quite a bit versus 2017. Okay, the vertical space that it uses is a lot less than it used to be. a lot. It's probably, I would guess, 30% less. And the reason why is because they've made a concerted effort to get the fluff out from this menu bar, collapse it down to just what you need so you can have as much vertical space as possible on your screen for code. So for example, the name of the project is right next to the search box. It's not on top in a blank line. It's right next to it. So this is just one more way they're trying to give you as much real estate as possible to actually work on code. Because the reality is, what you're here for is to work on code, not to just see their shiny IDE. Now let's talk integration with Azure DevOps. If you're not familiar, Azure DevOps is Microsoft's free cloud platform for hosting Git repositories and for managing boards like agile boards and those type of things, and for doing build systems, and basically the entire process of building code can be done in Azure DevOps. It's a really full-featured environment, and like I said, it's free. Okay, so as long as you're not a huge company, in which case you have to pay for licensing for it, but for individuals, for small shops and small teams maybe that are working together on especially open source. If you're doing open source, they're really generous with what they provide you. But in any event, that platform is great. It has some great features in it, but it never really had a full integration in Visual Studio. It's kind of like a half integration. You would do Git integrations, and there's a little bit of stuff extra, but pretty much that was it. Well, that has changed in 2019. Let's come over to the Team Explorer tab here, next to Solution Explorer. I'm going to connect to my repository. I'm connected to the Lifecycle Projects repository. So I create a course called the Application Lifecycle Design, which is where I take an application and I build it as if I was in a real build environment. And it's more focused on the build process rather than on the code building. So take a web application with SQL Server and I put it in a source control and I put it through a build system and deploy it to multiple environments and have a process for doing that automatically. That's all done in Azure DevOps. Well, with Visual Studio 2017, I had to do a lot of going back and forth between the Azure DevOps page and Visual Studio. With 2019, a lot less of that switching has to happen. This is the layout now for what it's going to look like to work with code. Where it used to have changes, sync, branches, and settings, now we have pull requests, we have work items, we can have tags, and we have builds. So for example, if I click on work items, this is a really cool one. Here's the work items I have to work on for that project. So I can see this work item, I can open it, I can create a new branch for this work item, I can complete it, and I can relate to changes. I can also come up here and say, you know what, I want to create a new bug or a new user story, task, epic, feature, issue, or test case. So if I create a new bug, just fill in the information. This is like so, and hit create. And now we have a new bug. We can go ahead and double click it, which will take us to the website, and we'll load that up, which I'm not actually logged in right now. That's okay. But I can do a whole bunch of things. I can assign it to me. So it's now assigned to me. I can start working on it. I can relate the changes. I can complete it, and so on. So it's not the full dashboard you'll see in Azure DevOps. But what it is it allows you to go into Visual Studio 2019, do your work, and connect that work to an issue, a bug, a feature, whatever. Change the status. Yes, now I'm working on it. Change the status and so on. And then when you commit, you can actually associate that commit with this bug, feature, or whatever, and that will take that through to Azure DevOps. So you're less and less leaving Visual Studio 2019 to go somewhere else to do work. You're keeping your work and your work about the work, the bug reports and the updates on what's going on, and all that kind of stuff can happen right in 2019. So that's very, very handy, and it leads to a faster development cycle because you're, again, leaving less context switching. And actually, let me show you one more thing that's in here. So if you come over here to changes, this is something that I've been waiting for with the IDE. I use Git from the command line a lot, just because there's some commands that are just quicker to do in the command line. Git stash was one of those commands because there wasn't really a way of doing it in the IDE. And so I would just pop out the command line and just type git stash and hit enter, and I'm done. So there's no reason to click, trying to look through menus and other options when I can just run that simple command. And when I want to bring the stash back, I would just say git stash pop. So really quick commands to get data, to get your changes stashed and to bring them back. And if you're not familiar with git stash and git stash pop, what it is say you're working on some changes, but you're not ready to commit them yet, and you have to switch over and do something else. So let's just demonstrate this. So I've got a change here. So if you look at my changes, I'm not actually committed as to source code control. We'll do that in a minute. So I'll show you. But essentially what would happen is I would say, I'm not ready to commit this yet to a commit, but I need to back it out temporarily. I would just come over here and say stash, drop it down and say stash all, and it would drop it into a stash. It would reset my files back to what they used to be before the changes. I could do my work and come back later. There would be a stash listed down here. I can just say git stash pop by right-clicking and saying git stash pop. And bring the changes back. It would rechange these files back to what I had been working on, and I can continue working. So really quick little thing that allows me to do my work again faster, less context switching. I can do it all in VS 2019. The same thing is true for pull requests. Again, I can make a pull request with my changes and set as active. I can also look at pull requests that have been assigned to me that I might need to review, all from within this console. Really, really helpful stuff when it comes to the DevOps pipeline type stuff. The source control and all the rest. So really helpful, especially if you're using Azure DevOps. Now, another thing that comes with working in source code is the idea that maybe you don't work alone, or maybe you need help from somebody, where you just get stuck, or maybe you want to pair program and you're not in the same room. Well, that's where what used to be a plugin that Microsoft created that they were really enthusiastic about for good reason, it's now become a baked-in part of the IDE, and that is Live Share. And I say baked in, meaning it's still an extension, but it's now in by default. So Live Share, what it allows me to do is it allows me to share my Visual Studio session. Now, I haven't set it up yet. We can work through that in a future video. But you set up the firewall to allow you to go through the firewall. But what it allowed me to do, and here's the message for that. There we go. What it allows me to do is to give somebody this link, which, yes, you could actually grab that link. But don't worry, I'm going to turn it off in just a minute. So that link will then allow people to see my code on their machine. It's not a screen sharing program. We're not sharing screens here. Instead, it essentially in the background downloads my code to their machine, opens up Visual Studio, and it opens up the code like I'm looking at right here. The really cool thing is, if I have my cursor on this line and I've highlighted this, they can see that. And yet they have a different cursor. So their cursor can be down here. They can actually look through different documents that I'm in. And they can help collaborate with me on what my issue is. Say, for example, I was not quite sure why I was getting this warning message. I'm getting this warning message. I'm just not sure what it's about. I can start a sharing session and bring somebody in to help me to look over my shoulder. I can explain the situation. They can scroll through the code as well. We can even step through the code together where when we pause the code, they can see the variables and I can see the variables. And we can say, oh, you know what? That line of code right there is just because you've never actually used I. Why do you have it here? And you ask me that question, and I go, I'm not sure why I have it here. Well, let's get rid of it. See what happens. And all of a sudden, there's no issues found in my file, and life is good. So that little bit of a sharing paired program type thing, or even a little bit of a broadcast, you can set up to make it read only. So instead of sharing access where your pair can also type code, you're saying, nope, make that read only so that I can share my screen and you can watch what I'm doing, but you don't have access to make changes to it. So also, it's a really great feature, especially if you need help or if you're pair programming, which I really encourage, or if you want to show off what you're doing to a couple people without doing a full screen sharing session. You want to have a little more interactivity, but yet not the full webcam setup or screen share, whatever. All right, we're going to start this application in just a minute, but first I'm going to put a breakpoint in here. Let's put the breakpoint at line 35. Now I don't want to start with Docker because that'll start an actual Docker container. Instead, I'll start with IIS Express. And I'll hit run. And once that launches, it's going to come down here and pause at this breakpoint. And we're going to look at the autos window and others. Okay, so let's wait for it to be done. All right, so we're paused now at this line 35. Notice the locals window. We also have the watch window, and we could also bring the autos windows up if we wanted to. We're not going to right now. But instead, what I want to show you is notice how, let's just look for inside services, we have is read only. Well, if you're looking for that, you can now search for it. Is read only, enter, and it takes you to it. Okay. The search depth here tells you how many objects deep do you want to go. And you can actually step through the different options. So if I just said ON, which is quite a few of those, I can move between the different ones. Notice how it's opening different ones I can go to. So this has been much improved for searching through when you're paused at a breakpoint, your locals window, your autos window, or your watch windows. Okay, so that's very helpful for finding something you're looking for, but you're not quite sure where is it. That searches, for example, if I were to say 261, notice it searches the value, not just the names. So searching both name and value. Also, it searches types. So int, there you go. It found that int. All right. So again, very, very helpful when you're looking for something specific in your window and you've got these nested objects in place. So you can search for a specific value, look for it, find where it's hiding, where it's located, and maybe find that you're looking at the wrong space when in your code. All right, we can stop that now. Don't need to actually run the web service. Now, this is more a .NET Core thing, but just know I have used the new Razor pages, which this is the Razor page. It looks a lot like an MVC view, except for the fact that behind it, it has a .cs file, which is what looks a lot like the code behind for a WinForm or WPF form, which actually what it is more like a view model in the MVVM framework. So it is a disconnected architecture, unlike what web forms used to be, but at the same time, it feels like web forms in its simplicity. So you still have just the simple bit of HTML, and you have the code behind, but there is still the idea of a separation of concerns. Also, they have taken the tag helpers to the next level. Let's look at a good page for that. It would be the layout page. For example, the tag helper here, we've got a href to a page, but then we have a fallback and a fallback test class and so on. Why do we have that? Well, if I am developing, and this is, by the way, this is in the environment excluding development, which means production. So if I'm in production, but I'm trying to test production, but I'm in an airplane. I don't have the I am by the Wi-Fi. They don't have the Wi-Fi. The Wi-Fi is down. I still want to be able to debug my environment. But this right here goes to a CDN, a content delivery network, which is a web location. I need to have Twitter Bootstrap if I'm going to make my page render correctly. Well, we have a fallback, and that's the local version of the Twitter Bootstrap CSS, or whatever you're looking for. There's also JavaScript down below, the same thing. I guess point out right here, the environment. So this is the development environment. That's what the CSS is. This is the production environment. That's what the CSS is. We've got down here the idea of ASP-page. It says /index. And that's a pretty intelligent page helper, much more intelligent than it used to be. For things like if you rename the page, it'll keep track of that. We've got the idea of anything ASP-. So for example, and it's context aware. So let's say you had this button here. If I just type ASP, notice the dash, it says ... So I hit dash here. Here's all of the helpers for the button. This list would be different if I was in a div or a nav or on a unordered list or on an input. Okay, so a lot of great tag helpers. I create a list. There's a link I can add that has a link to all the tag helpers Microsoft provides, the out of the box ones, but they're pretty great stuff right there. So definitely check those out when you're working in .NET Core. Again, kind of straying in the .NET Core territory, not just VS 2019, because you can do this in 2017. But it's kind of the new stuff that's coming along with 2019 that they're bringing along with it. So just kind of want to point it out as kind of a hand in hand. They're upgrading together. Speaking of upgrades, let's look at tools, options, and inside of our tools options, we want to look for the environment product updates. Check this out. Automatically download updates. This is for Visual Studio itself, which is pretty cool. It'll automatically download updates, and the installation mode is install when downloading. Now, the updates will only be downloaded on a non-metered connection, which means if in Windows you can set a connection as metered, which means if you're on, let's say, a mobile hotspot, you'll make sure you mark that as a metered connection. Some of them are smart enough to know that, but some aren't. Make sure you mark it as a metered connection so that you won't be downloading Windows updates, or in this case, Visual Studio updates, over that mobile hotspot, which is going to take up a lot of bandwidth. But as long as non-metered, and when your machine is idle. So if you leave Visual Studio open, but leave your machine idle, it will download these in the background. We can also set, we can change it to say, download the entire thing, then install, or do you want to install while downloading? The install while downloading is faster because of the fact that you're kind of overlapping those two projects so that when you're downloading, you're also installing. The overall time length is shorter. I recommend keeping it at that default. Also, preview features right up above here. There's some preview features you can try, and then you can either check or uncheck these boxes to enable or disable this. I'm not sure this will stay once this is out of preview, but just know that that's a possibility. But definitely product updates, check that out. Make sure that you're downloading updates automatically. Now let's move over to this extensions right here. Notice it's got its own menu section for extensions. This is for Visual Studio extensions. So you click on that, and it's going to open up our dialog box, which really doesn't change that much. But in here, we can see a couple of extra things that are kind of fun to see. And one of them has to do, let's search for a paid extension. So let's search for, let's say, Telerik. So let's search for that. Notice down here, these first three are just normal extensions, but then down here, this big blue box says trial. What does that mean, do you think? Well, which it blends in when you actually highlight it. But that big blue box is telling you this control, while fun, is only a trial. And at some point, it's going to ask you to pay for it. Some of these will actually be marked as paid, which means you can't even get it until you pay. So the options are free, which is nothing, meaning there's no tag on it. So this is free right here. Or trial, which is that blue trial, or you'll see that a similar tag for paid. And that just allows a little more transparency when it comes to looking at extensions. You may find an extension that's going to work great, and then you realize, oh, it's a paid version. I need to consider that as part of the decision process, not just fall in love with something and then find out, oops, I have to pay for it now. So just a little more transparency in this search window to know what's going on. All right, the next thing I want to show you is something that actually came in late in 2017, I believe. But it's something that for the first time in a new install, I believe, is in 2019. And that is, see this Get Tools and Features under the Tools menu? Select that. What it's going to do is it actually popped up a UAC dialog box because this actually takes administrative privileges. This is a Visual Studio installer that I just kicked off. This is my installation of the Visual Studio Enterprise 2019 preview. This is the configuration I used to install it. So from a menu in Visual Studio, I can kick off the installer again and configure what's installed for my Visual Studio. This is super helpful when it comes to trying out new things. Because maybe you've never used Xamarin before, but you kind of want to now because you've heard some good things. And oh, by the way, it's a lot faster in VS 2019. Well, you probably don't have it installed. But if you scroll down, you can find mobile development with .NET. That would be Xamarin. Well, just check the box. And now notice it's going to need 3.97 gigabytes. Of course, this takes up a ton of space, but it's worth it. So you can just check that box. You want to look at C++ stuff, you can check that. Linux development, cross-platform, whatever it's going to be, you can check the box. Or you can go to individual components. You can select which frameworks you want to target. Okay, you can select which options, like the class designer. Now you want to add the class designer. And then language packs. You can add other language packs as well. And even where it's installed on your computer. So with all of this, it's a running total. So I'm going to not install Xamarin right now. But now I have a 98 megabyte install. I can click modify and it will install while downloading. Let's just do that. And now I'm modifying my version of Visual Studio 2019. And it says, hey, you know what? Before you get started, these are the things that are open. You want to close those? I can close them myself though. So let's just go ahead and do that. I'll hit no to saving. It's going to close it out. I'm going to say, let's try that again. And there we go. So now it's installing and upgrading my version of Visual Studio. Notice how that download was working, but so was the installation down below. So it's doing both at the same time, much faster. It's almost done with that 98 megabyte download and install. And I haven't paused the video yet, just so you know. I'm going to now because the cleanup might take a little bit, but then I'll come right back. Actually, never mind. So I went to pause it, and as soon as I hit pause, it was done. So I can hit launch. I'm going to come back to the screen in just a minute. We have this launch dialog. I can select my 2019 demo, and now we're back inside of 2019. It's loading my application, and once it does, I'm back where I started from. I'm ready to go. So really, really helpful stuff right there, where just tools, get tools and features to add or change what you have in VS 2019. Now notice I have actually 3 different versions of Visual Studio on my computer. It knows about all 3. The other thing that's really nice in here, again, this came in sometime in 2017, is this More dropdown. Click this. One of the options is Export Configuration. What that does is it will take everything I have installed, it will remember it and save it into a configuration file. Then if I later move to a new PC, I can just take that file and import that configuration, and it will tell VS what to install and how to configure it. So really quickly, you can say, maybe to a coworker, here's the stuff that we usually install in order to get you up and running right away. It just makes life so much easier than saying, okay, check these options and then these individual options and all the rest. Just have them, use that file, and it will install everything that you have installed on your computer. All right, there's a tip I want to show you that I was just blown away with just by how easy it was and how useful it can be. Let's say I've copied this line right here. So copy this whole line down here, hit Ctrl+C. And then I say, oh, you know what? I actually need to copy this section up here. So I'm going to copy that, which wiped out the copy I had from highlighting this. But then I go, you know what? I actually want to paste, this somewhere. Well, if I hit up here, let's say, if I hit ctrl+shift+v, this is called a clipboard ring. And there is my div that I copied, but then number 2 is that section starting with @copy that I copied from before. So I can just click that, and now it pastes it in, which it formatted it for me, which is kind of awesome. All right, so that clipboard ring allows you to copy multiple things to the clipboard and then cycle through which one that you use. Very, very helpful. Okay, so that's one of those bonus things that came with Visual Studio 2019 that's just awesome. It's a little tweak, but it makes my life easier. Okay, so those are the big things that VS 2019 brought in. So we collapsed some menus, we added live share by default, we have the ability to export a configuration and import a configuration. We have extensions as their own menu item. We have some really powerful new tweaks and features inside of our IDE itself. For example, the page health and the CodeLens, even for 20 Community Edition. So the free edition has CodeLens. So there's a lot of stuff here. There's also a lot of integration with our Team Explorer. So we can think about pull requests and stashing and work items all inside of VS 2019 instead of going out to the web page. So a lot of stuff all around, but that's not it. That's kind of the visual fun stuff. Under the covers, Visual Studio 2019 is faster. It's especially more performant when you come to larger projects and solutions. So if you have a solution that's opening multiple projects, you can actually say, you know what? Don't load all the projects when I first start up. Only load certain ones. And then I'll load the rest as I need them, which makes loading a lot faster. When it comes to Xamarin, for example, there's been significant performance improvements in the Xamarin projects. So just overall, this is a faster system. It's got a lot of those little tweaks and those rough edges knocked off, and it really is a valuable upgrade to 2017. At first, when I started to use it, I wasn't quite sure of that. I started using it and said, well, what's the difference? Because it just felt like Visual Studio 2017, which in a lot of ways is a really good thing. Because if it's significantly different, it makes that learning curve start all over. But since it's just what feels like a gradual upgrade, it's a lot easier to just get in and start working. But when you do, you'll find a lot of these options just make your life faster. Working with your Azure DevOps, faster. Seeing issues on a page, faster. Seeing where you have references, faster. Okay? Just how it builds and how it loads projects, faster. Working with your copy-paste environment when you're pulling up the Clipboard Ring, lots faster. So all these things are designed to make your development experience faster, to keep it inside Visual Studio 2017, which is less context switching, which also makes you faster and hopefully introduces less bugs when you forget to do something by getting distracted and coming back. One of the things I haven't even mentioned is in 2017, it used to upgrade to the latest major version of a language. So for example, if you installed C# 7.0, well, 7.3, I believe, is out currently in 2017. But by default, a project would still be 7.0. It'd only be the latest major version, not minor versions. Well, now it's the latest version by default, which means 7.3. Or if you have an 8 installed, which is a preview right now, you'd be on 8. So it's always going to give you that latest version unless you switch back. The benefit there is whenever you're creating a new project, almost always you want the latest version. You don't want an older version. So by default, you're switching that version less because it's more often the version that you want. Again, faster. So it's these little tweaks and some big ones, but these little tweaks that just make your development experience better. So while this is visually a lot similar to 2017 and how you use it is similar to 2017, the benefits here are pretty impressive. And when you pair that with .NET Core, which is also significantly faster than .NET Framework, you got a really winning combination. So, while I'm not saying that you have to use this, I would definitely recommend, I don't see a reason not to use 2019. I don't see a reason why you would wait, even in a production environment. I've been using it in production, like I said, using the pre-release versions now for at least a month and a half. And I have no problems. Okay, I've had a couple of issues that were with the extras. And that's because there is very, very pre-release. And they've ironed out a lot of those issues. In fact, I don't think I have an issue left. And that's with a pre-release software. So I would definitely encourage you, upgrade to 2019. 2019 Community Edition is free. It launches on April 2nd. So if it's not April 2nd yet, It's coming, but you can get a preview version if you want, because there is the version that's going to be close to the general release version is out now. But the general release version, of course, will come out April 2nd. So check out that as well. They launch parties all over the globe. Try and get to one if you can. But I would definitely recommend get ready, use 2019. It's definitely ready to go. Okay? Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, or if you want to see something, or you wondered about something, leave a comment in the description below, or in the comments below, and I'll make sure to check that out and respond to you and hopefully get you the answer you're looking for. Maybe make a new video. We'll see. All right. Thanks for watching. And as always, I am Tim Corey.